So welcome to CTO Confessions webinar series. We have our guest here, Goran Chamurovski.
Yes.
How did I do? Did I was okay there? So I've been practicing that. Goran is a specialist in kind of security. He's going to be doing a presentation on the title which you see on screen now. In fact, before we start, let's explain what do you mean by how to fix the broken value chain, Goran?
Yes. I was a little bit nervous when I put this topic on the table to be discussed today, because I was having only good in a stomach, and from my practice, I see that this is a problem. Somehow, privacy and security are not working together, and because of that, the value chain of the businesses is broken.
Right.
Is that the outcomes that they want to achieve because of this broken chain is not achievable because it should be fixed. And now, immediately, 3 days before this presentation, I received empirical evidence that I'm right, because 3 days ago, ISACA survey, very big survey in the financial, in the computer services industry, has been published, and the participants that are mainly security and privacy professionals, when they are asked what is the biggest obstacle to implement privacy, they say lack of clarity of mandates and roles and responsibilities.
Wow.
With 45%, and they say lack of competent resources, 41%. You can imagine this, the professionals in this area are asked, and they say our roles and responsibilities and mandates are not clear, and competent resources, we are in lack of competent resources.
Yes.
And this exactly comes because there is a gap between privacy and security, and we will explain in this presentation, or come close to explanation, how this can be fixed in the benefit of the business.
Brilliant.
So this has given me the right to say, yes, this topic is the right topic that should be discussed at the moment, and my hypothesis was right. I have now the evidence. You can see that survey on ISACA, Privacy Practice 2021, and you can see many more results. Maybe I didn't have time to put them in the presentation because the presentation was done a week before this, and so I'm just now.
Excellent. Well, it's great that you got the title bang on. I love this because sometimes businesses do forget about what's important here, which is effectively delivering value to the customer, and getting that value chain right is central to that. And successful companies get that right. So it's a great topic. So in terms of the webinar here, the three key takeaways that I've got outlined here from your kind self is how to reconcile security and privacy for the business's benefit, how GDPR intends to force this through with regulation. And as you were saying, this is quite a new thing for where you are in the world at the moment, which is kind of Macedonia. Is that right?
No, we already have the law that is harmonized with the GDPR.
Yes.
We are not under the GDPR directly, but it is the same law, because we must, with this law, we are on the white list of the countries that are somehow in compliance with the GDPR requirements, and we are not under observation directly. So
good.
This is a good move.
Yeah.
It will be. It is already on power, but there is a period of implementation that will finish in September this year.
Brilliant. That's great. Great forward thinking to be prepared for it, even though you're not kind of held to it. Yeah. And being in a global world, obviously, what's decided in another part of the world is something that we just got to align to. So that's great. And the final key takeaway is how we're going to fix the broken value chain as described in the subtitle. So audience, we welcome questions. So please add your questions to the Q&A tool at the bottom here somewhere. I guess I'm pointing in the wrong direction, but you please use the Q&A tool. The chat is open. Please kind of share your thoughts there. I'll be picking up the questions and apply, rudely interrupting Goran at certain points to kind of present the questions if I feel that they're appropriate. Hopefully we've got time at the end to kind of mop up any that have been left behind. And I think that's it. So Goran, the stage is all yours, sir.
Okay, you've made some introduction, but I would say that first of all, I'm 25 years plus in this business, coming from computer science to business to security to privacy, and I possess the certificates that can somehow, credentials that can somehow say that yes, I'm capable to discuss this topic, because these certificates are related with project management, with risk, with CAPPE, CDVSC that are directly related with privacy. And 17 years I'm with Integra Solution. And since the very beginning, we've defining our services like managing the digital risk for the regulated industries. That is now changed with cybersecurity, with embracing the digital risk for resilience, because the environment has been changed with cybersecurity. And now we should not just manage the risk, but we should in real time, adaptively, while we are delivering the services in the businesses, we should mitigate the risks that could happen, because the perimeters are down, and that is the situation. This presentation, I would start with some short agenda that will first put on the table some mise-en-scène in terms of who are the stakeholders and what is the story about the privacy and GDPR. Then I will explain a little bit the gap between privacy and security and elaborate what this problem has happened. Of course, GDPR has anticipated the era that is coming, and they are in their regulation, they've put somehow through the requirements how we should address this gap. But because our behavior in the past was different, we should now accommodate to this risk-based and accountability-based approach. Then we will go to the implementation, the operations mode, where we will explain how this will be implemented from bottom up and from the top down. And we will explain a little bit about the data subject and his empowerment that is intentionally made in this regulation. We will put this into the business perspective, or we will look through the business perspective, how this value should be delivered without, and the outcomes should be achieved without having the risk and constraints for the businesses. So that is the main goal of the privacy and security professionals. So the business could deliver what they are intended to deliver. And on the end, how to make this sustainable, how to achieve the maturity level that is appropriate, and to make this sustainable and to continue with the delivery of the value. First of all, it is very simple. So we have a personal data of data subjects that are processed by controllers and processors. And these are the three parts that somehow should get together, but we should look at this from some perspective. I think that we have some pool here from which perspective we should see this. If you can put this pool and get the results, or it is too late, maybe I should answer this, but I will explain a little bit. So the personal data, the protection of the personal data is the main issue here. And the controller and processors are not just responsible, but accountable to protect this personal data. But they should do this from the perspective of the data subject. So the main problem is that we should see the regulation from the perspective of the data subject. And when we say this, the GDPR says that we should protect the data subject rights and freedoms. That is very abstract for the technical guys. how to protect their rights and freedoms. And that is the first problem, because the language of the privacy professionals is somehow abstract to the technical guys and to security guys. And that is the first gap, to use this definition in a way that we will understand each other. So we will come later on to the pool and see what are the answers. But to explain why this problem has arisen. Problem in a nutshell is that because we live in a post-privacy era. So the way how we can protect our privacy is changed dramatically in the past, let's say, 10 years. And you should know that the regulation for personal data have been firstly regulated when the computer came in our world, because it was obvious that they will use the personal data, and the way how we should protect them has been changed. So the other part is that is commercial. I must say that is the commercial part, because the marketing part, especially for the physical person, is very big business. And I would say that if the data is the new oil, we know that this is the sentence that is used for the big data and for the algorithms that are using the big data, then the personal data are the new gold. So even in the breaches that has happened, we will see that this is used or misused in a way. And we cannot stop that in an efficient way. And GDPR has anticipated this and put the regulation on power. Then we have a time gap between the last directive in '95, that is the directive, privacy directive that has been put on power in '95 in Europe, and now GDPR that is put on power in 2018. So this is a huge time. You know what everything happened in the information technology during these 23 years, let's say. And GDPR should be contemporary, not just for this era, but for the era that is coming. That means that the era of algorithms, of new algorithms, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. All this result in a gap between privacy and security. And if we elaborate a little bit how this gap and why it has happened, I would say that it happened while we were consuming the information society. We've produced a lot of footprints on internet, and personal data of the data subjects are spread, and the studies, researchers show lack of control over our digital footprints. This was very early, even 20 years ago, defined in the privacy. They say for this increased accessibility. There is a definition in privacy area that says that difference in quantity will make difference in quality. So the big data has exactly produced this environment in which we can misuse this personal data because of the quantity that is produced. And at the same time, in the privacy, all this is the language of the privacy, is exclusion. That means that we are not aware what digital footprints we are leaving on the internet in, and from this environment, then the danger has lurking, because this exclusion means that we are naive. We don't know what is happening truly, and we cannot fight.
Yeah.
Why? Because it was aimed that the data subject is responsible for his privacy, but he is weak to protect himself and to obtain the security. So That is the reason why GDPR has empowered the data subject. At the same time, new technologies produce many new threat scenarios that can be imagined or protected by the data subject. For example, technology could pick you out from the crowd, read from your lips, and by micro expressions know your feelings.
Wow.
Or there is a research in Stanford University where they produced the algorithm, artificial intelligence and machine learning, that with enough published pictures can discover our sexual orientation with quite high accuracy. Wow. So these scenarios are something that is happening now in real time, and already the technology is capable to somehow breach our privacy.
Yeah, so a question around that then, Goran, is the gap is constantly changing as well. It's consistently changing. So in terms of GDPR and general kind of legislation around it, is that adapting quick enough to keep up with our new understanding of what big data is able to find and what gets stored?
I think that, yes, this gap increases, but I am now talking about the gap between the privacy professionals and security professionals, and how they can work together. Because we've been accustomed that the privacy is the lawyer domain, and they will deal with this.
Yes.
And the security professionals, for example, I've mentioned in the previous slide, increased accessibility and exclusion. They didn't meet this as a threat. This is a threat, and from the privacy perspective, but it is not on the table on security.
Excellent.
And if you overlook something, then you are not aware. But however, the GDPR has anticipated this, and they've put on power the regulation that is an approach that is based on risk and accountability. So to explain this, I will go through these topics: what is the directive, what is the regulation, what is the difference, why this is regulation, risk-based regulation, that it is a risk-based regulation, accountability and burden of proof is on the controllers and processors. They should prove and they should be accountable for the personal data, and explanation that the personal data are becoming more tangible. With this regulation, it is required to be more aware about where our personal data are, and they should not be just the information, to be aware what type of personal data we are using. Then we should produce record of processing activities, definition of personal data and metadata. Many of the dangers are hidden in the metadata that we are collecting as a secondary product of the delivering our services, and in this metadata and the secondary product, there are many personal data that should be protected also. Then about the breach notification, that the processors and controllers are obliged to make the notification to the data protection authority if something happened in 72 hours. And exterritorial scope, why this exterritorial scope of GDPR is on power. So first, regulation means that this is mandatory requirement to obtain harmonization by EU countries. There is very little difference between country to country, and these differences are based on some interference with other laws and regulations, but they are defined in which area they could be different. And directive was implemented because the directive has different implementations across the countries. It was mainly implemented as a recipe. So there was a recipe what you should do to be in compliance with privacy, and that was a little for the big companies and huge problem for the small companies. That's why GDPR has put on power this risk-based approach. So the requirements are scaled based on the size, complexity, sensitivity of personal data and processing. So this should be seen as an opportunity. because it brings relevance and cost optimization. So smaller companies can do something that is basic, and as the complexity, sensitivity, and size grows, then the more control should be put on power, and this should be risk-based. So we must be aware for the risks, analyze them, and then based on the results, put controls on place to mitigate the risk. This gives a lot of relevance because now it is not a recipe for all the companies where you put the same controls for every company, but now it is customly suited for the specific company, and they will achieve through this cost optimization and relevance. Then accountability. In the regulation, they say you are accountable to explain to data protection authority how this risk is mitigated and why this works. So for this to work, you should have knowledge, understanding, and technology to monitor and to be sure that what you are presenting, you are standing behind that. At the same time, you have the burden of proof. So if incident happen, then you must prove how this has happened, and that to discharge the accountability in a way that you say, I have the evidence that everything was on place, the controls were working, but on the end, incidents are happening. If you don't have this, or you don't have appropriate controls that are required from GDPR, then penalties are here. For this to be more transparent, accountability is connected with breach notification and transparency. That means that the processors and controllers, when they found that something is breached, then they should notify this to the data protection authority within 72 hours. And through this, they could have a lower penalty if they are transparent and if they are cooperating, in comparison when they read from the newspapers that this has happened and they didn't announce this to the data subjects and to the data protection authority. At the same time, extraterritorial scope keeps controllers and processors accountable, even if they put the data, transfer the risk to the processor. So they are at the same level now. So this kind of escaping the accountability is not possible anymore. And it is controller and processor are responsible together. So all this gives us the, let's say, environment in which it is obvious that we must work on this topic. We will later see other arguments why. But first, I would start from the something that is required in the GDPR as an exercise called data mapping. So data mapping is required that you can show that you know where your personal data are, that you are processing as a processor or controller. And these are tangible data, not just information, but data mapping is intended to be produced to know each piece of personal data, where it resides. And in addition to that, you should produce record of processing activities, so how this personal data is processed. And under the definition of what is personal data, now we have implicit definition, not explicit definition that numbers what is personal data, but they say personal data is whatever discovers the identity of the some data subject. And there are many scenarios with big data and with combining two data sets where we can produce some identification from even from the data where there are no IDs. For example, from the address and telephone number, we can know who is the person of this record. At the same time, you should be aware about the metadata. Here, the strategy is to have less metadata, but sometimes, for example, like with the zero trust paradigm in the security, you are using the behavior data of somebody to discover his identity, that he is the one. And they are personal data. So this data, they don't have IDs and something else. They have what we are doing and how we are doing. And they discover again on us their metadata. And there are many scenarios where the metadata can be used. So from here, from the data mapping, we can go to the assets. And this is somehow bottom-up approach, and the security professionals are better in this approach. We will come later on from the top-down approach. Now, the main gap here is that from the top, the privacy professionals, and from the bottom, security professionals are not coming to the common ground, and they don't meet. And because of this, there is some gap that is producing overlooking in the how we are handling and how we are securing the person. Okay, so GDPR says that we must put risk management program on power within the company that process personal data. Then, based on this risk assessment, we should produce the data protection impact assessment that is required for the high risk processing activities. The properties known to the security, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, we are adding in the GDPR only additionally resilience is added, and resilience is a synonym for cybersecurity. The intention is to be aware that we are fighting this fight to protect personal data in the cyberspace, because everything now is cyberspace. Then there is a lot of technology that we are using as security professionals that could be used for protecting of personal data and protecting the privacy, but the level to which we are doing this at the moment is not enough. We are not aware about where the personal data are, how they can harm the data subject and things like that, and the scenarios are not on table. Then it is required that the personal data should be protected by design and by default. And pseudonymization and encryption are the controls that are required. These are like privacy enhanced technologies. Additionally, putting the controller and processor at the same level is something that is new to GDPR. And the data protection officer role that could be outsourced. So first, because we are all the time talking about the risk, this is the definition on the top from the GDPR that it says likelihood and severity of the risk to the rights and freedoms of the data subject. That is how the risk is defined, and how we should make the risk analysis based on the services that we are delivering and personal data that we are keeping. And opportunity, because in every new service, we have the opportunity to improve the privacy, and we see this risk as an opportunity risk because we want to do this, but at the same time, by design and by default, we want to integrate the privacy and security controls within the services. But at the same time, we are threatened by some events that can produce adverse effect on our business in terms that they can leak our personal data that we are responsible for and things like that. So these are the two components of severity. That means as much valuable our personal data are and as much threats will attack us, the severity will increase. The other part of the formula is related with the likelihood. And here we have the weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Weaknesses in terms that our personal data protection management system is weak in some processes, and vulnerabilities that our technology has some vulnerabilities in security terms. And the last one here is the controls and mitigation. So this is the mistake in the presentation. This part here should be controls. So by using the controls and mitigations, we are decreasing the likelihood that weaknesses and vulnerabilities could be misused by threats and disclose or leak our personal data for which we are responsible. And that is at the same time security definition for the risk assessment and management. But on the top of this makes the problems, because we should deliver this with the goal to protect the data subject rights and freedoms. Now, here, in this case, the scenarios on the table, how to protect these data subjects rights and freedoms, are very different from the scenario, security scenarios that we are taking care about. And we should somehow narrow this gap and put the scenarios on the table of security professionals with the aim privacy to be protected. I will add here additional explanation because there are many questions why the data subject is empowered. The data subject is empowered because it is weak in comparison with the processors and controllers. So there are many rights that he has, and through these rights, he is empowered to protect his privacy. At the same time, there are questions why the penalties are so huge, 2 to 4% from the revenue of the company, or 10 to 20 millions, depending on what is bigger. The penalties are big because in the past, the penalties were low, and this severity or impact was not coming on the table of the managers, of the boards, of the top management. So they say, okay, we will put here penalties, and then the board, the top management should take this in consideration, because otherwise they will suffer a huge penalties, and they don't want to do this. It is better to put this money in the implementation of GDPR, and we will come later on to these penalties and how huge they are. And this is the part that is with the impact. So we see that from the data subject that is functioning like a threat or opportunity if we are cooperating well and keep his privacy, and penalties again as an opportunity if we invest in protecting the privacy and obtaining the security is an opportunity. Then the severity of the high-risk processing activities is enforced by requesting the data protection impact assessment. We will come to this later, and I will explain, but again, it is related with the severity, because it says, consider that the breach has happened for the high-risk processing activities. Please now make the risk assessment in which you will find how your controls are weak or strong to fight with this. On the other side, what are the flexibilities? We have possibility to implement controls by design and by default. There are many codes and industry certifications and industry boards regulation that are for specific industries that we can follow, and they can prove our compliance. And if we use the pseudonymization and encryption, we can have an incentive. So we can be somehow released from the frequent observation of the data protection authority over our services. So these are the proposed controls. So on the side of the controls, we have some possibilities. They all mean that we should implement this system, and with that, lower the likelihood that this will happen. So approach is that we should first make the risk assessment, discover the high-risk processing activities, then make the data protection impact assessment for high-risk processing activities. And then if we have residual risk additional, we should do implementation of the control and the risk treatment that is on the bottom here, up to the level that the risk is acceptable. So If we have risk that is not acceptable, we make additional iterations and decrease the list to the acceptable. Now, so, what is this?
Sorry, yes? Goran, just very quickly. So in terms of doing these kind of risk assessments, I mean, I love the idea of every organization having risk registers and analyzing
yes.
impact. Now, from my perspective, from an engineering perspective, we always look at risks because they're going to happen. We need to be aware of them. So do you think that many companies actually go through this risk assessment, or is it quite a rare occurrence in the industry?
Yes, yes, they go through the risk assessment. And I would say that regulated companies, regulated industries are very familiar with this approach. But now the privacy topic should be on the table. That is the biggest problem.
Yeah.
So they are somehow overlooking this, even in the regulated industries. And in the industries that are not regulated, they are now becoming regulated with GDPR.
Yes.
Because now every company that possesses personal data is regulated through this regulation.
Good
so
stuff.
They are not very experienced, and they are struggling to put this to go through this risk assessment.
Brilliant.
And in addition, yes, yeah. In addition, now they should make this data protection impact assessment exercise.
Yeah.
That says that consider that this has happened, that the data, personal data, are leaked. Now it is like a business impact assessment in business continuity, and the risk is before the fact. Then we have list of processing activities that for which high risk processing activities, that for which we should do the data protection impact assessment, while the risk assessment is scenario based. High residual risk should be submitted to the data protection authority for consultation. So if you have high risk after the implementation of controls, you should ask them to approve this or not. While the residual risk in the risk management is accepted by the manager. Then data protection authority must approve processing of the personal data in the case of high residual risk, while in the case of the risk management, we could put contingency reserve as a guarantee for this non-acceptable level of risk. And what is important, data protection impact assessment should be based on the harms to data subject. So that is the topic. And risk should be based, in my terms and how we are approaching this, based on privacy-related security, not just security, but privacy-related security. That is a huge difference. So this is how the data protection methodology goes. It is very similar with risk assessment, but we should take in consideration the personal data and harm to the data subject. Here is some list of processing activities as an examples that could be high-risk processing activities. And for this, we should make the data protection impact assessment. So I will not go through this, but you see sensitive data, innovative use of applying technological organizational solutions, data transfer across borders, data sets that have been matched or combined, and things like that. So there are many scenarios. The list is growing. So the data protection authorities are putting this list. And there are something that is trivial, could be excluded from the data protection impact assessment. Or they say what is done for the similar processing or similar personal data. Yes, you shouldn't do this again, but that is not a huge exclusion. Then we are coming to the confidentiality, integrity, availability, and resilience. That is something, these three properties of information security. In addition, we are adding the cybersecurity to that. Resilience is mentioned only one in the regulation, but at the right place. It is mentioned in the security of process. Now, we should be aware that in many times the security professionals are not knowledgeable about the sensitivity of personal data. So this classification should be based on the privacy, from the privacy perspective. And we can use NIMITY as a parameter and a measure for value of personal data. So NIMITY is something that is language of privacy, not of security. If you say NIMITY to the security professionals, they will say, what is this? So maybe we will have questions for this and we will answer at that time. How we are doing this, or how we are proposing this to be done? By using the principle of by design and by default, and through technology that we are already using for security purposes. First, security information and event management system. Data leakage protection tools are something that is predominantly used in the privacy domain, but also in security domain. Then we should have vulnerability and configuration testing, penetration testing, access rights management. Now with cybersecurity, we are coming to the endpoint detection and response tools that are security professional tools, but they can be used for cybersecurity and for the privacy also. Database auditing and monitoring for personal data in the databases. And then we have set of privacy enhancing technologies that are not too much used in the security domain for the privacy purposes, but they are used for the security purposes. One of these is encryption and the other is pseudonymization. So the pseudonymization is a technique that is recommended by GDPR, and the way how we are using this should be in context of privacy. So these are the two, let's say, paradigms that could be used for privacy enhanced technology. And as a difference from anonymization, that is not possible anymore because the data will be not useful. Because if we have a purpose of processing, then we must keep the IDs, then we must keep personal data. And what is proposed is the pseudonymization. That simply means that we can put the IDs outside of the reach of the users and protect them in a special way. But the way how we will do this is becoming complicated because we must use encryption, then we can use the zero knowledge proof, we can use different techniques of synchronous, asynchronous encryption, access control, and many other very complicated way of how we can use, how we can make the pseudonymization. But it is worth, because I've mentioned in the slide that if you do these exercises, encryption and pseudonymization, then you can have some incentive that you will not be under the scrutiny or under the supervision, or you will not be so frequently, let's say, supervised by the data protection authority. Of course, this should be done for the very sensitive data in terms of personal data, and implemented with data at rest and data in transit and data in use at the same time. The other part is that in the past directive, the controllers were using transition of the risk to the processors, and especially outside EU processors. Now, it is not possible anymore. Transfer of data to other countries is under the scope of the regulation, and transit of data to processors are under the scope with the same scrutiny as the controllers. So this is not possible anymore as a strategy. On the end, the role of the data protection officer. So this is a new introduced role, like privacy officer, and he's very protected under the GDPR, and he is like, they say, he's like a white bear, and he's empowered, and he is used to be liaison between controller, processor, data subject, and data protection authority. And it should answer questions in relation with data protection impact assessment, the highly sensitive risk processing activities, to define them, to define what methodology will be used, to decide whether to outsource or do it yourself. And outsourcing for the smaller companies or for the middle range companies is recommended, because they are not invited to this risk-based regulation. And if they do this only for themselves, it is not worth the effort, and they will make a lot of mistakes. They don't have time or chance to learn this. What measures are mitigating risks? Very difficult question. So the data protection officer should give his opinion regarding the controls. And he is not happy, then the controller processor should put more powerful or more strict or more, let's say, advanced controls in place. If this is correctly performed, that means that he should somehow audit the controls, whether they are effective. And he should maintain this and find the candidates for new data protection impact assessment or high-risk processing activities for which this should be done. So this is very difficult task. As you see, this is security and privacy at the same time, and it is very difficult to be achieved in one person. Sometimes the strategy of outsourcing is used, and sometimes we have a combined team that is working together. On the event empowerment of the data subject. So I've mentioned that the data subject is empowered, and there are principles and data subject rights that should be fulfilled based on this regulation. And as a matter of fact, this is the other approach. This is approach that is more used from the privacy profession. They say we will go from the top down. So what is required in the GDPR? We will implement that. Notice and consent, profiling and automated decision making, minimization and purpose limitation, data subject participation and safeguards, data rectification, data quality, restriction of processing, breach management and notification, storage limitation, security safeguards, rights to be forgotten, lawfulness, fairness and transparency, data transfer, binding corporate rules when we have a mother company and affiliates in different countries. This method could be used, and data portability. You see, these are all requirements that are stated in the GDPR, and the privacy professionals are more invited to use this approach. But as I've mentioned, on the end, they should come together and they should reach the common ground on which they will meet. So here the gap happens. They don't do that. So from the top down, they are going to the compliance to some level that is not transparent, or personal data are not visible. How the security controls are used in privacy context is not clear. And the security professionals that are going from bottom up, they are not aware about the privacy aspects, and they cannot put the effective controls. And here is the place where we can help. So how to make security controls to be used within the privacy context, and how to show to the data privacy officer from the technological level with enough, let's say, transparency, but at the same time not putting them in the complications that they are not knowledgeable. So here I have a slide that again shows this. These are the statistic of the penalty that I've, let's say, taken as a screenshot from the relevant source that is measuring this in Europe 2 weeks ago. And we see that the biggest number of penalties are for insufficient level for legal basis for data processing, legal basis. This is so-called, I'm calling this commercial issue because we are somehow using the personal data as a gold. And the other part is sufficient security and organizational measures or controls to ensure information security. Now we are wondering how this is happening in the privacy domain when we know that the security in the companies is on the high level, but penalties are showing different results. Yes. Here we have some results from the biggest penalties. So Google is penalized 50 million euros because they are lacking in transparency of data harvesting and use of for ad targeting.
Yeah,
so this is the commercial issue.
So it's good, Goran, on that then. I mean, that's a pretty hefty fine, and it's one of the questions that came up by Al. I mean, 50 million is pretty. It's going to hurt, you know. That hurts looking at that number.
Yes.
So we've got a few questions around this. One of the questions that we got from Anna around this is with data, because we live in a kind of global world now, and data is kind of flowing across boundaries and across different regions. Is data allowed to kind of move between regions? Is GDPR covering that in some way?
Yes, it is covered. As a matter of fact, one of the benefits that GDPR has put on power in Europe is that now we can have a trade across the countries in Europe without having the privacy issues that are different from country to country.
Sure.
So it is the same law across Europe. So now, when the data is going outside of these boundaries, or somebody is coming and market the EU citizens, then the extraterritorial scope is on power. So again, you've seen that one of the high-risk processing activities was defined the transfer of data outside of EU. That means that in that case, we should announce this to the Data Protection Authority, and they will assess this, whether they will allow us or not, if we are controller or processor. So then we have H&M, because they were using sensitive personal data to make a profiling of the employees based on this data. They were using this data to promote them or not to promote them. Then we have team for direct marketing. You see, these are this is a scenario, personal data as a gold and commercial use of this data. And then we have British Airways and Marriott International because of cybersecurity breach and cybersecurity attack. So this is the information security issue that we have here with huge penalties because probably they didn't announce this breach and they found that it happened. So now how we can, as a conclusion, how we can make this cooperation between privacy and security sustainable. First, we should close the gap by learning each other objectives, training and awareness. You see the language is different, the technologies are different, the processes are different, the understanding, the scenarios are different. Then provide transparent insight to the data protection officer from the technology to discharge his responsibility. That means that we should show him from the technological level, because all these tools, technological that I've mentioned that can be used for this, are based on some risk assessment. And he should be aware all the time how his personal data for which he is responsible are protected. Learn the privacy aspects and implement appropriate controls by security professionals. So from this ISACA, there is some other, let's say, some other question in the survey that says that many of the security professionals, more of them are going from security to privacy than from privacy to security. So this is appropriate recommendation because they should move first. Reconcile business, security, and privacy once again, because we were having this story that security and business have been reconciled in the, let's say, some 15 years ago. Now we should put privacy in this story and maintain the level by monitoring, auditing, and assessment. So even when we achieved some maturity level, we should all the time take care to keep it at that level. So this is the story. We should make the balance and overlapping of knowledge, technology, and processes between businesses, security, and privacy. That is the best strategy. And sometimes controllers and processors are still using the strategy, okay, we will do our business without taking care of privacy, maybe some little security. But at the same time, we must be aware that all these privacy requirements should be business friendly. Because on the end, if we say that to mitigate this risk, the business should go out of business, that is not a solution. And how it is done by using the security in context of privacy. That is how the gap could be narrowed, and we can deliver services by having proper security and legal architecture. So they are the basics, and they are like a brake, but brake is not used to make us slow, but to make us sure that we can drive, we can deliver our services in a way that is secure, that is privacy friendly by design and by default. And so we can push on our pipe because we are sure in our brakes and we know that we can stop. Wow. We are sure in that.
Nice analogy.
This is especially important for the companies that rely on contracts, consent, and legitimate interest, because other companies, especially in the regulated area, they rely on laws, and laws are on power. And it is EU has spent 2 years to harmonize all the laws with the GDPR requirements. So they have some kind of better base because the law is what is requiring, and how the data should be processed is already somehow to some level defined. That doesn't mean that the story is finished, but they have some basic that is solid foundation on which they can develop their privacy management system. And they should use GDPR as a competitive advantage. So the story here is if somebody revokes the consent, or say the contract is no more valid, I will not use your services anymore, or you rely only on your legitimate interest, then you will go out of business. However, we see that with GDPR, we should achieve the maturity, and then we should make this maturity level sustainable. And this should be done through compliance by top-down approach, then through effectiveness by putting the controls on place and ensure conformity. That means that we will be more secure and we will have better privacy, but to not to have breaches, we should be even efficient. And this approach should be risk-based. Data protection impact assessment should be done properly, and by design and by default, controls should be put in place. All this could be kept at a sustainable maturity level with auditing, testing, and all other exercises that are related with privacy. Okay, thank you for your attention, we've run out of time, but I believe that the participants will be patient to answer their questions.
Sure, yes. So obviously we're at the kind of top of the hour, so we might have to kind of bring the webinar to a close. But we do have some questions.
Yes.
Deb asked one around, what does this mean for kind of American enterprises? Should they be thinking about this? Are they already thinking about this?
I think that at the moment we are doing some kind of marketing, and we are not aware whether our now participants are from EU or from USA, and almost all the businesses that are based on this kind of technology and services are affected because they could have EU-based customers.
Yes.
And under the extraterritorial scope, that means that if we get their data, then we are responsible for it, no matter that our company is in USA.
Yeah.
The other part that was achieved as an agreement was Privacy Shield. Privacy Shield is something that is put in power in USA, but I would say on the end, the Privacy Shield is overridden by GDPR requirements. On the end, because in the Privacy Shield you say, yes, I'm compliant, I'm responsible for this, but when you come to the implementation, then you will implement the same controls that are applicable for GDPR. Brilliant. And I don't believe that some company that is serious want to be in USA want to be excluded from the EU market.
No.
So they are all marketing on the
that's right.
The EU countries.
Who would not want to be participating with the EU? It's a wonderful part of the world, So. So hopefully that answers your question, Deb. We've got a series of questions here from Anna Zovska, and it looks like she's really into this. She kind of asked some very intriguing questions. So I don't know if you can see the Q&A tool there at all, Goran. I won't even attempt to read out the first one because it talks about Article 43 and 42.
I must go to GDPR.
No, that's good. Yeah. So
I have a problem to learn this literally. What is 43 or 40? So if she mentioned the topic, then we will discuss that.
Yeah. So what we'll do is that we'll collect the questions that we got so far, and I'll collect them up, and then we'll send you, and hopefully we'll kind of distribute that out post.
Yes, that is the best way.
Yeah. Brilliant. So Goran, thank you very much. I mean, that was really interesting. I'm going to be honest, I didn't think I'd be interested in GDPR because it's not something I work with, but it is actually quite an in-depth area. So thank you.
You are also data subject, so you are empowered.
That's right. Yeah.
You can use this power now.
It's making me
against
think about,
the processors.
Yeah, it's making me think about what I've left behind in the world and how my data's been used. So
you should be worried about that.
So we'll share your kind of contact details. The webinar will be made available on YouTube thanks to Slavko, and thank you for IT Labs for sponsoring this. Audience, don't forget to subscribe to IT Labs newsletter because we're always putting out new webinars and what have you. I think our next one's going to hopefully be on AI at the edge, and and kind of pass on any questions you have around GDPR so we can forward them on to Goran. So thank you very much for your time, audience, and absolutely massive thank you to you, Goran. Thank you.
Thank you to the participants and to everybody who has organized this. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay. Keep safe, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you.